Good evening. Good evening. We are getting started here. As you can tell, I was a little bit distracted there. It's been a busy day, but we have an exciting show for you this evening, as always. Welcome to Fresh Natural Live. I hope your Monday's been very eventful and very exciting. And of course, I hope you had a very productive weekend. I was pretty busy this weekend as well. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Frank Smith, whom I had the pleasure to meet. Actually, last week, it was introduced to me by a friend and colleague of mine. And the reason I like to consider him one of our heroes. He's a gentleman who had defeated liver cancer. And as our show dictates, it's liver cancer no more. And I like to refer to our patients, especially individuals like him. You remember Gigi, whom we had on a few weeks ago. I like to think of them as conquerors. And he's not a liver cancer survivor, but a liver cancer conqueror. And when you hear his story, you're going to understand why I say that. Today is part one of the story we're going to share with you. Mr. Smith is going to go through his story, and I want to hear from him, his process, his journey. Now, the journey, his life's journey starts long before the diagnosis of liver cancer. As we're not, we're human beings first and foremost. We're not diagnoses or whatever the case is, but our health conditions are part of our life's journey. So as with him, his health condition is part of his life journey. And so what I want to do is I want to share with you his story. And I think this is going to be really important and really exciting. So I want you to get your pens and pads out, get comfortable, get a nice cold press juice handy, your favorite raw, vegan, natural snacks, and all of these things, because I think you're really going to enjoy this show. You're going to learn a lot. And part one is going to be very thrilling, and part two is going to be thrilling. So hang on, get ready for another episode of Fresh Natural Live. Okay, welcome back. So I'm going to bring into the studio two of my esteemed colleagues who are here to join us today. Dr. Celeste Palmer is here. Hello. How are you doing today?
Good.
Saving lives in the pediatric world. And Dr. Pamela Atkins. Hello, Dr. Atkins.
Hi.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever part of the world you're on. You seem to be moving around the globe.
How's everyone?
So we're all doing great. Let me pull something off my printer. As y'all can tell, I'm being very last minute today, but we've got so much good stuff. It's worth being last minute. So I want to introduce to our audience Mr. Frank Smith. Mr. Frank Smith is 73 years old. He grew up by his description, and I'm going to have him tell his story in more detail, but his background health-wise, he was an alcoholic, a self-described alcoholic, a 20-year history of IV drug use that ended in 1985. He reports a 23-year history of cigarette smoking that ended in 7/1/86. He said both parents died of cancer. Dad had kidney with progressed to bone cancer, and the mom had cancer at the age of 84. And so that's some relevant historical facts. And I give that to give you the background. I'm going to have him, tell his story, because he can tell his story better than we can, to give us a global picture. So, Mr. Smith, hello, welcome to Fresh Natural Live. How are you today?
Thank you for having me, Dr. Montgomery, Dr. Palmer, and Dr. Atkins. Good to be here.
Hello.
we had a conversation, and I'm going to mute. We probably have to go back and forth mute. I'm going to turn my speaker down. I think that's the culprit, and I think once we do that, we'll stop the background noise. So we had a nice conversation. I was introduced to you by Dr. Milton Mills, and he shared with me your fascinating story about how you had liver cancer and overcame that. But then when you and I talked and you shared your brief bio, and I looked at this long history of things, you've actually overcome a lot more than just liver cancer, and you've overcome quite a bit more. And I'm going to share my screen real quick of the brief, because I titled it "Liver Cancer No More," and I gave the subtitle "From Destruction to Healing." So I hope you didn't mind me taking the liberty of giving that description, but I gave that description from destruction to healing. And I think that could be applied to all of our lives, because we all have a historical background based on our lifestyle before we knew any better, that we were somewhat destructive to our bodies. And I think all of us who are on this health journey is in a journey of healing. And so I stated it that way to be broadly descriptive. And I don't know how do you take, what is your take on that?
Yeah, that's true. Life is a series of overcoming obstacles. And
Yeah.
I give God all the credit, because he's taken me through all of this so that I can tell other people about his ability to lead them through conquering their obstacles as well.
And Mr. Smith, if you can get closer to your microphone, because you have a fascinating story, I want to make sure everybody hears it clearly. So take us back to the beginning. So you grew up with an alcoholic and two smokers. So those are family members there. You say you have a 20-year history of IV drug use and a history of smoking. Just give us a description of your overall backgrounds, maybe your childhood. Start with some of the relevant things and give us some highlights of you growing up, the social atmosphere, et cetera, et cetera. What was it like being, Frank Smith back in the day?
Well, my father was an entrepreneur. My mom's was a government worker. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And as with a lot of families during that time, it was about having fun. And fun was, a drink, a smoke. And at that time, smoking was advertised readily, and it was lauded by doctors.
There's some other things being advertised these days, lauded by doctors. We won't get into that, but go
ahead. And I can't blame them, because it's what we were taught. It's what they're taught, and in addition to getting paid by the companies that be. So I can't blame them. Except I can blame them. And so it was about having fun. Substance abuse was a part of my upbringing. So I took it to a new level, as kids will do. They take things to a new level. And so I started experimenting from cigarettes and alcohol. I started experimenting with marijuana, and then on up the line of, amphetamines, pills, the works, hallucinogenics. And then, interesting enough, cocaine and heroin were flooded in our community. They just were poured in our community. And
where'd you grow up? What
I
part
grew
of
up in DC.
In DC, okay.
Yeah. But a lot of other communities were the same way. It was cheap and readily available. And in the 60s, changing your mood was the thing to do. In addition to that, you did what you wanted to do as long as it didn't hurt anybody. So I got into that real hard and heavy, and ended up on intravenous drugs, and that lasted quite a while. And finally, I got a voice from the Lord. And it was more than a voice because I felt it with my whole body. He said, if you keep doing this, you're going to be going to jail for the rest of your life, in prison for the rest of your life. And it dawned on me, this is abnormal. I don't feel these voices with my entire body, you know.
Yep, yep, yep.
So I better go ahead and straighten up now because I'm definitely don't. I don't know about this voice, but definitely don't want to be going back and forth to jail. So I went. Interesting enough, a drug program opened up that day, and I told them to give me 3 or 4 days so I could withdraw from this methadone that I was taking now. That was supposed to be the solution to drug abuse. And I got in, and that was, after some struggles, I had to learn because I'm the type of person you got to sit down and teach and show me how to do this thing because I was trapped by then.
At what age was this when you went to rehab and got on the
This
methadone
was
program?
age 37.
37.
Yeah.
Was that successful right away? How long did it take you to get off the those drugs?
Yeah, so that was successful, but I tried by myself a number of other times.
Mm.
Um, a number of other times, and I didn't have God and I didn't have the program. So that was successful for me. But at the same time, well, 11 months later, I quit smoking cigarettes too.
Oh,
Um,
wow. How'd you do that?
yeah, same thing. I was feeling bad, and I said, "This is crazy to be in a drug program and still using a drug." Right? That was making me feel bad.
It was good that you recognized cigarettes as a drug, because a lot of people don't think of it that way. So
Yeah.
I think you had a mindset. So I'm going to welcome a few other people. Catherine Welch, hello. Nicole Caldwell, hello. Beth Kelly, Lady J from England, hello. Barbara Pillis, Barry McCoy, how you doing? Good to see you. Zorro has a question. I'll answer it quick. Zorro wants to know if all drugs are liver toxic. Many drugs are, but other drugs may be cleared by the kidneys, etc. And so they're prescription drugs. So many drugs that go through what we call first pass, you take it in, it's digested in the liver, it's broken down by the liver. They are liver toxic, but there are other drugs that are primarily cleared by the kidney that are more nephrotoxic. Some are broken down in other ways. So I don't like to say all, but a lot of drugs are. And much of the time, if people are on multiple drugs, there's a good chance that one or more of them are cleared by the liver and hepatotoxic, or as we say. Beth Kelly, hello. Rose Fiddler. So,
Dr. Montgomery, will you specify, like, that even includes like acetaminophen and ibuprofen?
Yes.
Yeah, so great point. So drugs that we consider harmless, because when people say drugs, they think about the heavy stuff, but these, so-called, just take a Tylenol or acetaminophen or whatever, or an Advil. These things can have adverse effects on the liver. That affects us at the cellular level, so the mitochondria is adversely affected. Some drugs, NSAIDs, could affect the kidney, the GI tract. So all of these drugs, when we think of these, heroin and all of this stuff, but there are many other drugs that can be very, very harmful, and maybe as harmful as these other types of drugs that we say frown upon, but yet they are very problematic. So those are great points.
And sold in the pharmacy.
And sold in the pharmacy. That's exactly right. That's so anyway. So that's a good one. And did you ever do cannabis?
I'm sorry.
Did you ever smoke marijuana?
Oh yeah, that was the first illegal drug that I smoked, that I did, and I quote loved it so much, that hey, that opened the way for me to experiment with other things.
Interesting. So basically, you got off cigarettes, the illicit drugs, around the age of 37. And then, and you said 1982, you're diagnosed with hypertension. So you had the hospital admissions with severe arrhythmias due to potassium depletion because you're on a diuretic for hypertension. So you treated with one medication for one condition, created another issue. I see you report a heart attack, 3 sinus surgeries over an 18-year period of acute sinusitis. You're on antibiotics, several visits to the doctor's lab. Let me ask you, as we comb through these diagnoses, what kind of dietary habits did you have? And did you exercise regularly, et cetera? So we kind of hit on the drugs and alcohol and cigarettes. But what were the foods that you ate?
Well, the foods, I ate the standard American diet, the SAD diet, including, if you want to put it that way, I ate the black standard American diet. Right? Barbecue, lots of fried things and processed meats and eggs and dairy. Yep. Very little vegetables, and the vegetables that I ate were overcooked. And very little fruit, some canned fruit, but very little fruit. I ate what my parents ate. And I ate what my friends.
And this was up to what age, roughly?
This was from birth.
From birth. Okay.
Yeah, this was from birth.
And so back in 82 and all this time, the sinus surgeries, you eat that standard American diet. So was that after you had kicked the habit on some of these other illicit drugs?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you had gotten off of those things and you were doing fine there. But then you were on the standard American diet, the soul food version, if you will. And so you continue to have health problems. Were you taking any prescription medications? You mentioned one, a diuretic. Were you taking any other prescription medications?
Not that I remember. Well, let me take that back. Every time I went to the doctor, I would end up with a prescription. So in the end, I had a whole closet full of medicines, right? And I noticed that each one had an adverse effect. So
Gotcha. So I'm going to pause right there. Dr. Atkins, I just want to get your take on it. So, I mean, your assessment, Mr. Smith, at this point, he's has a history of illicit drug use, and he's on the soul food diet. He's on a lot of medications. Give us your take on what's going on in his body and what's happening to him. What are the issues? I might even ask you what's been more detrimental to him, the standard American diet, soul food, or the illicit drugs. We can kind of throw that up for debate, but give me your take on that.
Well, I just thank you, Mr. Smith, for sharing your story. I think it's very powerful, and I think it's a story of a lot of people. But with not just the diet, with the processed food and the fatty meats and the smoked meats and the barbecue and the fried foods, etc. But also we have to think of alcohol. Alcohol is liver toxic, so the liver has to work harder. And so you put with that, medication, prescription medications that need to be metabolized by the liver and illicit drugs at some point, so it's like double, triple whammy. Then if we drink sodas, high fructose corn syrup, is very, can be detrimental to the liver and lead to fatty liver, which a lot of Americans have, or non-alcoholic type of hepatitis that can lead to cirrhosis or liver failure, just purely a diet with processed food and a lot of high fructose corn syrup. So he had kind of triple, quadruple whammy here, things going on.
Yeah. So Dr. Palmer, you see a lot of kids, on the standard American diet, but also teenagers are drinking and smoking. College kids are doing these illicit drugs. And so, this, starts at a very young age, as Mr. Smith shared with us. this was something that, he had a family where, and of course it was the time as well. I mean, cigarettes were promoted and that type of thing. And so it was really the social environment with him as well as, the family environment. So it's kind of a, global environment. What are you seeing with kids nowadays? I mean, that was then. What are we seeing now? And is this same issue being replicated with that same fast living and the food?
I'm going to piggyback off of what Dr. Atkins just said. And I don't think that we can project, again, what the future is going to hold, because the children now are getting processed sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and processed foods much earlier in life than we did 20 years ago. And this is a mainstay in their life. So what happens to a child who's been exposed to processed food, processed sugar for 30 years? When is a disease going to manifest, and how is it going to manifest? I don't know the answer to that, but there is definitely, I feel like, going to be an escalation in diagnosis of something, because we know that sugar itself is harsh on the liver, and we are seeing children. I check liver enzymes in children. It's kind of a standard check between the ages of 9 and 11 to get a baseline. And some children do have elevation of their liver enzymes when I check this, and it comes from, it's from fatty liver, from eating too many fats. And so, we talk to the parents, and sometimes that will help them to kind of see that the processed food and the fast food is not such a good idea, and they'll take it more seriously once we see labs. But, this is happening. And we are trying to show the parents the fault and the problem with taking in a lot of fast food. Even the food from the grocery store is technically fast food now. I mean, I think that's a topic for another discussion for another day. But, helping parents and children to recognize what real food is versus what this food products are, and trying to convince them to be interested again in eating real food for nutrition and not just eating for entertainment purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like that last comment, eating for nutrition, eating for intentionally, not for entertaining purposes, because that's a big problem. What is your take on that, Mr. Smith, eating for entertainment? Would you characterize your previous approach as eating for entertainment, or how would you characterize that?
Everything was for entertainment. everything, everything that I did. So naturally, eating is a big part of our lives. So naturally, it had to taste good, and I got whatever was out there, fast foods, cooked foods, whatever was out there.
Tell us about the heart attack. Was it a major heart attack? Did you get a stent? Was it a mild heart attack?
No, it was a mild heart attack. I was in the airport in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and I just dried up and started seeing black, and went out for a bit, and came around. I came around with myself. I didn't go to the doctor or anything. I didn't know it was a heart attack until later. When I went back to the hospital, and they said those the troponin was up.
Yes. Oh,
troponin was up, and the doctor told me the cardiologist told me I had a heart attack. So that was weeks later. So it was fairly mild.
And how old were you at this time?
I would say 40, 42, 43, something like that.
42, okay, 40. Now, another part of your history I think is quite interesting is that you had 3 sinus surgeries over an 18-year period for acute sinusitis. You're on antibiotics up to 6 times a year. Is that 6 times a year over 18 years?
Yes. It built up to that.
Okay. Some years more or less, but you're on a lot of antibiotics for a long period of time.
Yes.
And and that's interesting that you mentioned that. And one thing I want to highlight for our audience, and we're talking about adverse effects of drugs, quote unquote, whether we call them illicit drugs or prescription drugs or whatever. But I do want to highlight this because when I looked at this history, it's something that jumped out at me because, being on antibiotics, and I mean, one course of antibiotics can throw your microbiome off quite a bit, but you're on up to 6 times a year. So maybe sometimes twice or 3 or 6 or whatever over 18 years. And I can only imagine, I'm not sure if I can imagine, but I can maybe guess at what's happening with your microbiome. But I want to really I want our audience to put a pin in that because, antibiotic use is something that we do very commonly. And doctors may prescribe it at the bat of an eye. But antibiotics can have a significant adverse effect on your microbiome, and the especially the gut microbiome. And your microbiome has a big impact on your immune system. So when you talk about immunity, then you want to say, well, okay, what is your immune system important for? Well, fighting infections, but also protecting you from cancer. The body's constantly fighting against cancer. So if you're taking a big hit on the immune system, that's it. Yeah, doctor.
So I just wanted to add, you can, of course, continue, but we do unfortunately use a lot of antibiotics in pediatrics.
Yep. And, that's an important point, too, because, the microbiome is it's a collection of organisms. I think I've heard and read experts say that we have 10 times the amount of microbial cells than we have innate cells. And then it's estimated that we have probably 100 times more microbial genetic material than we have innate genetic material. So we are more of our microbiome than we are of our cells. And a microbiome has a very important symbiotic relationship with our innate self, if you will. And so it's really important if we throw that microbiome off, we are in essence, I don't want to say destroying, but certainly effectively harming our ecosystem. And we are an ecosystem where we have this huge microbiome living symbiotically with our innate cells. So I just want to highlight the concept of these antibiotics. That doesn't mean that the other medications you were on was not harming the microbiome, because I'm sure they were. But antibiotics is something that we can easily point the finger at. And so, I'm just pointing the finger there. But I thought it was important that you mentioned that in your bio. So fast forward to what I want to do is, before we take a station break, I want to walk right up until the time you had the diagnosis, and then I'll take us to station break, and then we'll come back and get into the nuts and bolts of that diagnosis. But so you had the heart attack, you had the sinus surgery. How old were you when you were diagnosed with liver cancer and cirrhosis?
Let's see. I was in 2013. I was 8 years ago. So
okay.
65.
65. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So from the time you had all these illnesses, let me just get a good characterization. You're in your 40s when you had the heart attack. Were you in and out of the doctor's office a lot, or in and out of hospitals a lot? I know you had the sinus surgeries and all that. Would you call yourself a sickly person?
A very sickly person. And I was overweight. In 2011, I was 211, right? So at that time, I'm suffering from a lot of things, and I don't know why. Of course, the cancer had already started. Part of the intravenous use gave me hepatitis C. Hepatitis C is another killer of the liver. So I'm starting to feel bad, and then there became a period of high stress. I've got a business, and I was working a job, the high stress job. I'm in IT, and so I was doing both at the same time, and I'm sick at the same time. So it I got sicker.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that's a good. I think that's a nice little segue. So you bring us up to this point. You were very sickly. You had bad food. You had survived the illicit drugs. A lot of people would have just given you a blue ribbon and walked off. But then you were on the standard American diet, the Black standard American diet, as you describe it, the soul food version, and you're on a lot of prescription medications. You were working hard, had a stressful job. One could argue that you were leading a productive, successful life, but there was some destructive aspects of that, and I can identify with some of those, having a busy, stressful life, and getting sicker all the time. And so I want to put a pin in that, and want us to take a break. And when we come back on the other side of break, what I'd like for us to do is I'd like for us to look at the setup for this diagnosis of liver cancer, because we talk about a diagnosis of liver cancer, but our previous discussion is really the buildup to that whole process. And so let's go to break, and we'll come back and finish up with continue from that point.